But most of the time, our shadow self are just our insecurities. It's just all of our insecurities. In fact, what happens is, as we're developing our personality as a child, we are approved of things and we are disapproved of things. So as we learn new things about ourselves, and even before we have a self, but as we're acquiring this new knowledge and we're learning new ways of expressing what we're processing, that expression comes out, and then our parents, if they're good parents, tell us that that's a good thing or a bad thing. And if it's a good thing, we make that part of our ego, and that becomes the personality of the ego. But if it's a bad thing and a shameful thing, well, then that gets filed away into this thing called the shadow. It goes into a filing cabinet of the things I'm not supposed to do, or the things I'm not supposed to say. So, getting back to this pretense, what we're shooting for is just allowing that shadow where we filed all of that stuff that we've been told is bad about ourselves. When we're alone, we let that flow freely. We let all of that flow freely. And then when we're around people that we think we might judge us for that, we close that valve at least halfway, and we only show the part that we want other people to see, and we reserve all these parts to ourselves that we don't want other people to see. And here's the crazy thing. Everyone is doing this. Everyone. There's not one person here that's not dealing with a shadow self. This is just the nature of mind development. And this is just the nature of what it is to be a human. Now, here's the thing. This is where we get into working on yourself. And I don't want to get too far ahead of it here, but if you can choose to work on yourself and choose to integrate your shadow, you become a whole person, because you found a way to open that valve of who you really are all the way. And in that letting go of fear and letting go of shame and letting go of all of those weird feelings that make you feel bad about yourself, then we're being the full embodiment of our spiritual self. We're allowing our full self to come through, our full sense of self without pretense. So, here we are with this shadow, and I'm going to show you something here to kind of illustrate this a little bit better. Joseph Campbell drew this in one of his presentations. And Joseph Campbell, I'm a huge fan of Joseph Campbell. He was a philosopher, writer, historian, very, very famous in his day, and wrote a book called A Hero of a Thousand Faces, which is all about these echoing traits of every story that's ever been told. Every good story that's been passed down for generations hits these key markers. And he deciphered this code of markers, and he calls it the hero's journey. And it has tremendous philosophical implication, which we'll get into. That's a whole other show. But for now, part of many of his lectures, and I really encourage all of you to learn as much about him as possible, Joseph Campbell. He put up this chart describing the shadow self. And I think it's so beautiful. There's a much more detailed one that Carl Jung made, and I'm going to show you that later. But this kind of like is the intro level of to what the shadow self is. So as we're developing our brain, we have all of the good features, all the things that mommy and daddy tell us are good, go into the ego box. Okay, and then everything that we think is bad and we're ashamed for goes into the place called the shadow. And it gets filed away in these filing cabinets. Now, why is this important? Why is this important in the scope and context of everything that we talk about here on this show? Because what we perceive as reality is a comparison contrast between the experience at hand compared to a previous experience, a previous aspect of ourself, a more inner aspect of ourself, and that contrast is projected in front of us as our reality. right? So the things that you're seeing out in front of you are reflections of the inner self, but they're not just reflections of who you think you are, but it's also a reflection of the shadow self. It gets reflected in the mirror too. And that's all of the stuff that we would call the negative things in our life, all of the trauma in our life, all the crazy things that happen to us is the reflection of this shadow personality. And it has a personality just as sophisticated as the ego. And it lives dormant in you. And you can even say that this is who the adversary is if you really want to narrow it down to nuts and bolts of the adversary. Let's just say that the adversarial energy utilizes the shadow in a very, very significant way to oppress you in this dream. So if you can wrangle in this shadow, you're limiting how much that adversary can hurt you, if that makes sense. I'm here every Saturday night, usually between 10 and 11, depending on what I got going on. 10 and 11 Eastern Time. And I would love to have you guys all join in and ask questions and get the conversation going. Otherwise, it's just me talking. That's kind of boring for me.